Hello, today we would like to speak about the question of why people fall into the trap of thinking God is physical. As we spoke out in our very second keystone lecture, the third of the 13 fundamentals, which is only really one fundamental, but you can build them all out from that one, the very first one, as we've been trying to do with all our lectures here. If you think carefully, the idea of reward and punishment all comes from the idea of an infinite God which reveals himself to mankind, assuming he's good, which I think that you have to take as a given. The third one also comes out is that God is not physical, and we explained that besides our tradition and besides the verses in the Torah which demonstrate this quite clearly, there is also logical reason why God can't be physical, because anything which is physical has definition. So to define something means it's got boundaries conceptually, and because God is unlimited, therefore he can't have any boundaries on him. Which means he can't be physical, and he can't even have any concept associated with him himself. So whenever we talk about God, we're actually speaking about our perception of God's communicating with us, which is actually just a bridge between God and us, but we don't actually perceive God directly. We only perceive God through his revealing himself to us, just like the light waves of your friend reach your eyeballs and his sound waves reach your ears, and then you're communicating with the person themselves. This is very important. You're not communicating with the light waves or the sound waves. That's just a conduit. But you're directly speaking to the person. That's an important point, because you might see that's the mistake of what idolatry is later. They actually give separate importance to the actual mode of communication, which sounds ridiculous, but we'll see what's going on there. So what is the mistake? Why do people make the mistake? Okay, right, so we were just finishing off. So since God is unlimited, that intrinsically includes within that concept that he is undefined, because any definition intrinsically is a limit. So therefore God can't be limited by definition, because he is the cause which isn't an effect of something else. So therefore God himself can't have any finiteness or any definition or any concept associated with him, because that can only come from the process of logic, cause and effect. So he has to be above any concept. And also because if you take on axiomatically that he's literally unlimited, he's infinite, so therefore, it's very straightforward why he can't have any definition then. Okay, so there's two approaches how we know that God is not physical. The question is, where does the mistake come from? Right? So we spoke about in the last lecture the idea of the structure of the physical and spiritual worlds. We explained that God's at the source of everything, and then you have God's methods of communication, which are called his attributes, and then you've got the souls of human beings, and you've got the spiritual worlds and the physical worlds. And we explained that one aspect of that is the building blocks, the spiritual roots of the physical world are actually the letters of the Hebrew alphabet, which is called Lashon HaKodesh, the Holy Tongue, because that is the language God used to create the world. So we see from here that the thing which is more real, closer to God, so to speak, are spiritual letters. Now, these letters are obviously not the physical letters which we actually write on a piece of paper. That's just an expression. It's a physical physical manifestation, if you want to call it that, a physical way of representing the spiritual energies. Yeah, there's a whole world of discussing what the significance of the shapes of the different letters of the Aleph base is, the sounds they make, the numerical values even. Yeah, incredible. If you look at the Aleph base and you go into it, there's a whole book by one of our greatest sages, Rabbi Akiva. It's called Oisius to Rabbi Akiva, where he just goes through, essentially goes through the Aleph base and explains the deeper ideas hidden within the Aleph base. I'm sure you can have access to many lectures on this topic if you look for it. There's a couple of books. If people are interested, I can write in the comments about the wisdom of the Aleph base to get you started. But anyway, so we might touch on one or two letters occasionally, just to bring out what different ideas are associated with those letters. So now we understand that the spiritual letters are the source of the physical reality. So the question is, what's more real? Is the spiritual reality more real or the physical one? Right? So if you think about it, the spiritual one's more real, basically, because that is the source of the other one. You can have the spiritual letters without them being manifest in the physical, but you can't have the physical object without having a spiritual sort of battery, energy source constantly keeping it in existence. A bit like you can have a soul without a body, but not a functioning body anyway without a soul. Okay. So let's look at it in a different way. What are spiritual realities? What are these spiritual realities really? When we speak about the letters of the Hebrew alphabet being the spiritual source of the physical, what does that mean? With speaking words, okay, you can accept what I'm saying based on the Jewish tradition that there are letters, and it's clear in the Torah. God says something, and then the thing came into physical being. But what are words? What are they exactly? They're the source of physical, but what are they? Right? In common parlance, basically, words are concepts. That's the idea. Right? If you have a concept, there's a word for that concept. It could be the concept of something abstract like truth or honesty or justice or purpose. But you can also have concepts which relate to physical things like a chair, a table, a hand. Right? So these are all concepts. Right? But each concept has a word associated with it. And as we explained, when it comes to Lashon HaKodesh, the holy tongue, the holy language of Hebrew, is that there's an intrinsic connection between the word and the object. Right? So the concept is represented by the word. The word, in a way, is the concept itself. Right? And the physical hand or chair is just a physical manifestation of the concept. So let's think about this now. So if you would take all the chairs in the world and you just destroy them and no one remembers anything about a chair, would the concept of a chair be affected? The answer is no. It just so happens it's got a very weak revelation in this world, because there isn't an example anywhere of a chair, because someone's gone, in this hypothetical example, he's gone destroying all the chairs. So we see the concept is more real than the physical manifestation. The concept's more real than the object. right? For example, another example, just to get the same idea, the color red, let's say there was no one who can perceive the color red anymore. Yeah, everyone became colorblind or something like that, or someone went around the whole universe making sure nothing had the wavelength of red light. The concept of red hasn't changed one iota. It's still whatever red is red. Yeah, one day maybe there's a refraction of a yellow light, and then look, this new color, right? And if you're like Adam, like we explained in the last one, you say, "Well, I think the name of this is Odom." Odom is the name, the Hebrew word for red. Odom. Right. So you see that the concept is permanent, whereas the physical expression of that is temporary. It can happen to be. It can also not exist. So that's how we look at reality. Something which is more spiritual, something which is more conceptual or abstract, is more real than the physical world. But how do people look at this world? When people look at the world, they look at the world as we're living in the real world here, and the world of concepts is just ideas. It's just ideas. Very similar to how we explained the 70 languages last time, where they look at what is the reality. The reality is the physical world down here. Yeah, like the Tower of Babel, we've got the city and the neck, but you don't have a head on top. You don't have the world of concepts. You don't have the spiritual source to the world. Everything is physical. Physical reality is the real reality. That's how most people think. They look at the physical world. I spoke to a taxi driver once. Yeah, end up speaking about God. It's me. What can I do? Right? He said, no, I don't believe anything I can't see. Right? Another guy said, look. So there you go. Yeah. I said to him, well, what do you believe in? Light waves, radio waves. You can't see that. So okay. He got a bit stuck. The Greeks had an answer to that, but we're going to see that the Greeks were essentially making the same mistake. The Greek philosophers I'm referring to. Okay. So people generally look at the physical world as a world of reality, right? And the spiritual world, the idea of concepts, is just to help us function in this world. So they've got everything upside down. So really they're looking, and understandably so, because when we're in the physical world, what do you feel? What do you touch? What do you see and hear? You see and hear and feel physical things, because we are in the physical world. We're stuck in this dimension. So the predominant reality in the physical world is physicality. The spiritual world seems to be something, that's an interesting thought experiment, very interesting, something to think about, the laws of nature, yeah, very interesting. God, spirituality, well, very interesting, but people are so stuck in the physical world that when they think of the spiritual world, it's something as like theoretical. That's a word, theories. Theories are associated with something which, yes, it's an idea, but is it true or not? But my hand is definitely true. That's the mistake people make. And understandably so, because we are in a physical dimension here. Of course, if someone knows about quantum science and things like that, and what's it called? Not astronomy, cosmology, yeah. They look at the roots of where the whole creation comes from, and the idea of the Big Bang and things like that. They understand everything, all physical matters actually it's just a compression or evolution, if I can use that word, of I wouldn't say spiritual. They don't describe it like that, but of energy. Energy is something which we associate more with spiritual. It's something which is not tangible, but it has an effect. spiritual things have an effect on something, but they don't really get affected themselves. They're forces which act upon other things, on objects. So objects are the things which can be affected by energy. So the way we're describing it, that you've got physical energy which acts in the physical world, like heat, I don't know, sound, light, things like that, right? Different types of energy. But if you go higher, then you get onto the level of spiritual energies, which are completely non-physical. These are the letters of the Aleph base, Hebrew alphabet. So we've got these two ways of looking at the world. The Jewish way is we see that words are the source of the object, and the physical world is just an expression or it's a product of spiritual realities. Sometimes the concept of Shin Lamed Ches Nun, which is the word shulchan, a table, manifests itself in a certain place and certain time. Sometimes it doesn't manifest, but the concept is unchanging. So that's the reality. And the thing which is less real is the thing which is only temporary, which can exist, it can also not exist. So its existence is fickle. Physical world that's a good word, has a fickle reality because it can exist and it can also not exist, whereas concepts have got much more permanence to them. They don't really change. That's why it's a very serious, just popping into my head, might as well mention it, very serious what people around the world, these progressive people, are trying to do by redefining things now. Because what they're doing is they're trying to destroy spirituality in the world by redefining concepts, right? What is a man? What is a woman, for example? Yeah. And you see they have this very clever way of manipulating language. And as we explained last week, that communism is very connected with this idea of excluding spirituality and God from the world, and the way that communists do things is by censorship. You mustn't say certain words. They reframe language, so language changes. So basically, you're artificially changing the world of concepts. They can't actually do it, but at least in our minds, they can get people to try. They could try to get people to corrupt their idea of what concepts are. Right, the idea of if we say 2 + 2 = 5, then 2 + 2 = 5. Right, a famous example. Was it in was it George Orwell's 1984? I believe it was in. You gave that example in the story there of a despotic, totalitarian regime where like they brainwash people. Said, "What's 2 + 2? It's 4." A person knows 2 + 2 is 4. So no, it's 5. And once the people believe that 2 + 2 was actually 5, then they'd let them go from the indoctrination chambers or whatever. Yeah, that's the idea of corrupting concepts. It's very hard to do because concepts, everyone knows the truth of concepts. Yeah, you have to be very corrupt in your mind to start thinking that 2 + 2 is 5. But these are the enemies of language, the enemies of truth, the enemies of spiritual, and the enemies of God, essentially, is what they try doing. They reframe even concepts. It's not good enough that they just rebel against God in the physical world. They actually go up to the top of the Tower of Babel to do war against God, which is one of the 3 explanations given what they were trying to do building the tower. They're trying to do war against God. Yeah, we don't want your concepts. We'll make our own concepts. See, in Egypt they did the same sort of thing as well, in a different way. And the story of the Exodus. Might speak about that another time if we get round to it. Okay, where are we up to? Okay, Right. Oh, so now we've got these two opposing worldviews. The one which looks at the physical world as reality, and the spiritual is just a convenience, something to help us function in the physical world. And the Jewish way of looking at it as the spiritual is the reality, and we can demonstrate that by showing how concepts are more real than physical because they're permanent. Something which is permanent doesn't change, is more real than something which can change. So now we understand why people make the mistake of thinking that God is physical. Because if you think that something which is more real is more physical, then what must God the Creator be? He must be the most physical thing possible. So they conjure up the idea of a massive person in the sky with a big white beard and is stomping on the clouds like a giant. That's how they picture God. If your frame of reality, if your framing of reality is that things which are physical are reality, spiritual concepts are just there as a convenience, so therefore the ultimate being in creation must be physical. But if you understand that spiritual things which are unchanging are more real, then you understand that God must be the most unchanging thing possible. It has to be the most permanent thing, even more than concepts. We said that concepts don't change, but concepts do change because there was a point in time where they didn't exist and God created those concepts. Right? Now, God, for his reasons, wants to keep the world running, so he constantly creates these concepts in order to be the battery, the energy source for the physical world. Right? But intrinsically, if you're talking about intrinsically, concepts don't have to exist because God can just change his mind and decide I don't want that concept anymore, nor will I ever know the color red ever again because I'm just removing that concept from the world of words, the world of spiritual energies. But God himself is the ultimate reality. He can't change. Yeah, that's why we say we can't say anything about God because he's beyond any definition. Right? There's no framing God. Because as soon as you frame it, then there's a limit. When there's a limit, that means there must have been a beginning to it. Let's have a look at this. Is what the Greeks believed this. The Greeks said that we don't believe anything we can't feel or touch with our senses. We're coming up to Hanukkah, the festival of Hanukkah, in about a month's time. And we see that the fight of the Jews against the Greeks in about 2,200 years ago, something like that, 2,300 years ago. The fight was a spiritual battle. The Greeks didn't want to wipe us out, not like the Persians or like what's happening now. Certain nations trying to wipe us out physically. Or 75 years ago, 80 years ago. Right? The Battle of the Greeks was different. They're very happy to just occupy the country, let us have our traditions and everything. But they said no spirituality. Yeah, we like different cultures, very nice. You've got this culture, that culture. They've got very interesting beliefs and very nice, very nice customs and things like that. It's very enriching for mankind to have these customs. You can hear the echo of this world's the real world, and these concepts, these nice customs, enrich our world. So they're looking at it from the lower point of view. Whereas we were saying that no, the Greeks claim to be the enlightened ones. But we call them, out of all the nations, we call the Greeks darkness. If you look at the second verse in the whole Torah, Genesis chapter 1, verse 2, it says, and the land was tohu, it was tohu is undefined, let's call it that, and it was barren. These are very weak translations, but for our purposes, yeah. Tov vavohu, waste and desolate, however you want to describe it. V'choshech, al darkness, al panei sahom, on the face of the deep. And our rabbis, darshan, they using exegesis, they actually say that these represent the four primary forces of evil in the world, which correspond to the four exiles the Jewish people have gone through, which is the Babylonian one, the Persian one, that's the time of Haman and Achashverosh, the book of Esther, the Greek exile, even though it was in Israel, it's still called one of the exiles, and you've got the Roman one, which is the last 2,000 years, which is we're still under the influence of the Roman Empire, maybe not the Italians themselves, but certainly their religion has been oppressing us for 2,000 years. So, but the third one is the Greeks. So let's go through tohu, emptiness, bohu, desolation, v'choshech, darkness. The Greeks refer to as darkness. It's very strange because you might have looked at it like, look, okay, they were quite intelligent. They brought philosophy and science to the world, yeah? It's just they were wrong about the spiritual part. We look at it very differently. We look at that as darkness because they are saying, and at least until the Greeks, the world understood there was a spiritual reality which you couldn't directly necessarily intuit with your mind, even though you could. Abraham, our forefather Abraham, did it. You can see the harmony of the world and intuit and understand that there's a spiritual source to the world, right? Right. So, but when the Greeks come along, they say no. Only things which we can tangibly have contact with have any real meaning. So that's why they're darkness, because they're literally cutting out the whole world of light, the whole world of spiritual energy from the world. That's why they believe the world always was, which is the antithesis of our way of looking at the world, because we understand that God transcends the world, and the world, so to speak, came out of a place where we have no access to, and then our minds are limited. We cannot understand where the world comes from. It comes from a being which we can't describe. Whereas the Greeks said, no, we have to be able to understand everything. So the world couldn't have come out of something which we don't know. So even the source of creation, we must know it somehow. How? Well, as we explained, very big people. So you've got like the big sort of like people in the sky throwing lightning bolts and with the tridents and things like that. And then they've got, but there must be something before that. So they've got things called the Titans and things like that. Right. The thing called time, was it Cronus or something like that? That's where the Titan of time, right? They believe time always was, right? Time is infinite. You can demonstrate quite easily how time can't be infinite, but okay, because infinity has no boundaries. Okay, so things within the infinite. If you remove something from it, if you've got infinite time, there, if you remove the last year, and you just sort of like cut out 1 year and then rejoin them together, the beginning of that year with the end of the year without experiencing the year, if time is infinite, nothing's changed. Right, this is a very hard idea. I'm not going to go through this proof too much, but yeah. So if you something which is infinite doesn't change, basically. All right, it's very, very intricate, this proof, but okay. But if you just take it simply, if you remove a year, then if time is infinite, we shouldn't feel any difference in our timeline, and obviously we would, because a whole year of historical events has disappeared. So therefore, time can't be infinite. It's a separate proof why time can't be infinite. Okay, but this is brought down by some of the earlier philosophers in the medieval philosophers brought that proof. It's quite an interesting one. Anyway, so we see that the way of looking at the world now, ever since the Greeks, to be honest, is the physical world is the reality, and the spiritual world is sort of just concepts to help us function. And that's why they end up not believing anything they can't see or they can't feel or they can't detect with their senses. Whereas the Jewish people, with a real enlightened one, not to be too bragging about it, but God gave us this information, so we're thankful to God rather than it's not coming from us anyway. We have been enlightened by God to realize that there are things which transcend the physical, and in fact, the ultimate being is the one which transcends the spiritual, even the spiritual energies and all concepts. Ultimately, you get to God, who is the ultimate, unchanging being, right? And everything else in the world is just God trying to communicate with us. Just to finish off, there's another way of explaining why people make this mistake. It's connected with the Greeks. Just make sure I get it right. Yes, if you remember the second keystone lecture about what or who is God, we spoke about there's two aspects to God. People get very confused because they try on thinking about God. We're thinking about with our natural limited mind. So the people come up with one of two possibilities. Either God is unbounded, like we keep saying, which is the truth. Yeah, God is undefined. He's above all concepts. But then they have to say, but so what are we doing? What's running the world? How can God, who is totally transcending this world which we're in, how can he have any connection with it at all? That's a mistake which some people make. They believe that God is transcendent, but he's so transcendent, he's got nothing. We're lowly physical beings. How can we have any connection with God? That's one mistake people make. The other mistake is the other direction, is that they believe that, well, God's clearly communicating with us. There's clearly spiritual forces in the world. Maybe there's revelation, or we can see through nature that God's running the world or something like that. Yeah, we can see different energies. The laws of nature must come from somewhere. So they say that, yeah, there must be a being which created the physical world. But then he can't be transcendent. Because if he's transcendent, he couldn't have any connection with this world. It's this paradoxical question which causes every single religion and theology and philosophy to make a mistake. Whether it's from atheists, whether it's from idolaters, Greek philosophy, whatever, different religions, they're all making one mistake. They're either looking at one side of the equation as an exclusion to the second one, or the second one to the exclusion of the first one. Either God is so transcendent he's got no relevance to this world, or he's got relevance to this world, so therefore he can't be transcendent. But the Jewish people say there's both. The answer to the question is that God himself is transcendent and unknowable, but yet he has set up a system where he can communicate with us somehow, and we don't understand why. We don't understand how that's possible. But so surely we should be the ones the Jews should be the ones with the worst philosophy, theoretically, according to that, because we've got a paradox we can't answer. So the answer to that is that who says a human mind can understand the infinite in the first place? How can we understand a God which is above all concepts? It's just logical that we can't understand him. Right? So therefore, but it's as we demonstrated, I can't remember which lecture, we demonstrated that there must be a creator because we are here and that everything's got a cause and effect, so therefore there must be a primal cause. Right? The world didn't come out of nothing because everything has a cause. So if you just go back to the beginning of time, there must be something which triggered that. But So therefore there must be a revelation of God in this world. He is doing something. But if you go to that first point in time, so what was before that? The Creator. But that means God, the Creator, is outside of time. If he's outside of time, therefore on his level, nothing else can exist except him. So you have a paradox. You can work out the paradox. The paradox is a logical conclusion. But all peoples of the world want to either take one side or the other for whatever reason. And we're going to see that, and well, we're going to see it right now. I'm about to say it. Right? This is actually the source of the two types, the two primary forms of, you could call it heresy or just being wrong, or falsehood about mistakes about reality. The first group of people who believe that God is so transcendent that we've got no way of communicating with him, so what do they end up doing? They need to get their energy from somewhere, and they realize that they're not the source of their own spiritual energy. So therefore they have to pray to someone, to something. So what they do is they understand that God set up somehow other things to control the world and to run the world, whether it's the stars, the constellations, whether it's other energies, spiritual beings, and basically they worship those things instead. And that's called idolatry. People who believe that God is too high for us to have any contact with. So therefore, we want to have contact with the spiritual somehow, or contact with God, but we can't do it directly. So they go through a conduit, a middleman. To get there. Any religion which has someone in between us and God is essentially idolatry. That's a vast majority of the world, I would say. However, you've got that's more on the east side of the world, where you have all the spiritual religions. They have lots of idols there, and a certain religion in the west as well, but you can work that one out yourself. Right? You're going to see it's a bit different. It's a bit different there. So in the Eastern world, let's cut it simply. In the Eastern world, you have all the idolatrous religions, right? Hinduism, Jainism, Sikhism as well, guru worship. Yeah, people they have to worship the gurus or the ancestors in order to connect with the spiritual reality, or they just don't bother connecting with the spirituality beyond they just serve the idols or the as themselves. In the Western world, they take the other approach. They look at the idea that God is connected with the world, but he's intrinsically connected himself with the world. And they picture the world as time always was. But what is time? Time is basically the creator, and the creator sort of evolves spiritually. He changes, and you've got the Titans, and you've got the different Greek gods and stuff like that, and eventually you come down to the physical world at the end of all of it. So they're looking at God as part of the world intrinsically. That's Western society, and that's why the major Western religion believes that God became a man. Right? So it's interesting. It's got echoes of the Eastern and the Western mistake somehow. Right? But really, I think that it's an offshoot, and we know historically the main Western religion is actually based theologically on the Greek philosophy. It was a very popular Greek. The Greek mythology at the time was pervasive in that area of the world. The idea of demigods and things like that, spiritual, the creator coming down, having even physical contact having children, incredible, right? With human beings, right? Is it like I think that's how Hercules is meant to. I think his father was meant to be one of the Greek gods with a lower G, right? The Greek mythology gods, right? And with a human woman, so he was a demigod. Yeah, Hercules. And I think many stories like that happened. I think Romulus. I think Romulus was also something like that. It's also sort of a demigod or something like that. That's the idea that they have. But it's all based on the Greek philosophy, though. The idea that we have to understand everything, right? We understand everything, so therefore there can't be anything transcendent. So which side of the paradox are we going to take? We're taking the side of the paradox where everything is understandable, and God therefore must be part of the hierarchy. He's not something above the hierarchy. He's the first stage in all the stages, but he's still part of the hierarchy. He's connected intrinsically. He himself is connected. Therefore God can, according to that, change. That's why the Greeks believed in all these mythical stories and about the gods doing things and even coming down to the physical world, because essentially they're looking at God, or in their example, gods, as physical beings, just very, very physical, just very powerful, much stronger than a regular human being. Yeah, you look at things like Hercules. He was like half god, so he was very half, or Achilles or something like that. I can't remember these stories from my childhood, unfortunately. I had to be very fascinated about these stories, very interesting ones. You realize when you get older what's really going on, what the philosophical underpinnings of these stories are. They've got these very strong, powerful beings, yeah, not like gods, but they're definitely stronger than humans. Achilles, he got dipped in that river where he became immune. It's the idea of us being, God, he's like us, yeah, similar, right? Just he's better. Yeah, we can understand God himself. And obviously we know that the Greeks, their culture was basically usurped and plagiarized by the Romans. The Romans didn't really make anything. They really destroyed a lot of Greek culture. Yeah, and they just took the good parts and kept it going. Like the fourth beast in the book of Daniel refers to the Rome as the big beast which destroys and devours. Yeah, we see that's what the Romans did. They just conquered everything, and they were very hedonistic. They didn't add anything to philosophy or science that much. Yeah, they just took this world and destroyed it all, devoured it. And as we said, the product of the Roman psyche, the Roman way of looking at the world, which is based on the Greeks, is the Roman religion, which again says, right, how do we have contact with God? We're too low down, so there must be a conduit. But the way I think it really works is they understand that God was always part of this world. It's just he decided to evolve himself into a human in this world, right? And they say he's one, so therefore God must be physical according to that way of looking at it. At least it's within the realm of physicality, of concepts, of definition. If he can change, he's under time. Yeah. Whereas the Eastern religions, they look at God as something too high. That's why I believe I heard, someone told me that it's incorrect, but I believe that the roots of Islam are actually the Arabs used to be idolaters. Yeah, they've got the Kaaba stone, I think in Mecca. I think they go there. I don't know if they worship it now, but they touch it or something. They got some sort of idolatrous sort of like what's it called, idolatrous rites there, or something like that. They'll say no, they're adapting because they became more monotheistic with the invention of Islam. So, but originally they were idolaters. What does that mean? They mean that their understanding is that God is so high, he's just, we don't have any, he's just, you know what they say the whole time. They say God is great. Yeah, because they understand that God is truly transcendent. We've got no way of accessing directly God. So I heard that Muslims, their prayers are basically, essentially, it might not be strictly true, but essentially their prayers are really just praising God, but not necessarily asking God for anything, which would make a lot of sense if they come from the eastern part of the world, and their way of looking at the paradox of God being transcendent or God being connected with the world, they look at the transcendent part. Therefore, how can we ask God for anything? Just like the idolaters thought, we can't ask God for anything. God is just so beyond everything. Why is he interested in me? If I get food today, what a low down thing to ask. You don't go to the king with a whole procession, says, "Hi, could I have a sandwich, please?" You don't do that with a king. Yeah, they're right. You don't do that with a human king. You go, you plead for like mercy for my city, right? You don't ask for personal things. That's God's much too high for that. So therefore, they go to other things. They have idolatrous practices. But in the case of Islam, it's interesting that they got the monotheism, right? But they got rid of the idolatrous thing, which is good, I guess. Yeah. And but you still see the echoes of that about the idea of them not wanting to ask God anything. Rather, they just do the praising of God. Again, I'm just doing it based on what I heard from a Muslim taxi driver. He told me that. So again, I get a lot of my information from taxi drivers, you can see. All right. So you've got these two opposing worldviews. Is God transcendent, or is he part of the world? Right? And we believe there's truth to both of these things. God himself is transcendent, but yet at the same time, he does communicate with the world. And you have the East and the Western world, which are very, very different. You've got the more spiritual world in the East, and you've got the more hedonistic physical world in the West, which have got their spiritual roots in the East of the idea that God is transcendent. So therefore, how do we communicate with God? We've got to go up there, and well, okay, if we can't meditate our way all the way up to God, then we've got to serve something else, which is one of God's messengers. Whereas the Western world looks at it the other way around. They bring God down to us. Yeah, they say God's part of the world. That's a world of atheism. Yeah, there's no true transcendent God, right, who's all powerful, right? It's just a whole load of different forces, the forces of nature, science. Greek philosophy is all about science, right? Looking at the beauty of this world, right? And that comes out in the Western religions as well, as the idea that God is part, God can change himself, he can change and become a person, just like many of the Greek mythologies and the Romulus, as we spoke, and the idea of demigods, and the idea of this religion as well. The main religion of the Romans, which is basically the fourth exile, which we're still in now, been in almost 2,000 years under the Romans' power, all trying to take us with them. Make us think that God isn't transcendent, that God does have an image. Okay, so hopefully that's giving you a very detailed, in-depth way of understanding the Jewish understanding of why people think God is physical, and the very deep mistake people are making if you analyze very deeply into where all these religions and all these philosophies come from. They come from the two things we spoke about in the second Keystone lecture about God having these two elements, if you want to call it that. You've got the aspect of God himself, which is above all concepts, above time, above space, above any understanding, but yet at the same time, God somehow set up a system where he communicates with us. So when we communicate, we do communicate with this being which is above everything. Just like you communicate with your friend, even though you never see your friend, you only see the light waves coming off him, but you're communicating with the friend himself. So God said to set up this genius system where we can communicate with him, but at the same time, he's still above everything. Okay, so, and the East and the Western world latch onto one of those two mistakes. And because we live in a physical world, that is the source of the major mistake of making the spiritual not the real reality. The physical is the reality. And therefore they understand God as being physical, because the more physical, the more real. That's where the Greeks make their mistake. But on the other hand, you've got the Eastern religions which don't make this mistake like the Western world does. They understand that God is truly transcendent, but then they've got a completely different problem, is that they make God too transcendent and unattainable and unapproachable completely, even after God set up a system where he communicates with us. I mean, we do exist at the end of the day. That means God did do something. There is something coming from God to make us exist, right? And making us aware of him. So again, it's a mistake there as well. So this is basically a nice, neat summary. And of course, it's very interesting geographically how God arranged the world. You've got the Eastern world here, and you've got the Western world there, and you've got out of the three patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Abraham's son was Ishmael, which is the spiritual source for the Eastern world, which is basically, we see it's Islam nowadays, it's the Arabs. And the spiritual source for the Western world is Esau, which is Edom, which is Rome. We go through the whole history, exactly how you end up being Rome. That's the Western world, and they're taking from these two, and he was the son of Isaac. And then you've got the East world, East part, yeah, it's probably the wrong way around in this video, because this is East for me, that's West for you. Okay, right. So East and West, and then right in the middle, you've got Eretz Yisrael, you've got Israel, which is the place of the Jews, where we're sort of like that fine balance to, take the good parts of both sides of the world, and we represent the harmony of these two sides of the paradox. All right, it's a nice poetic way of finishing it off. Also very interesting, another interesting observation is like the Sabbath as well. The holy day of the Muslims is on the Friday, and the Western religion is on the Sunday, and we're kind of in the middle on Saturday, the Shabbos. So again, God throws these little hints at us, to show that we're the balance between the two, because we're the balance between these two aspects of the paradox. We'll speak about this another time, about what Abraham brought to the world, which was very different from everyone. Hopefully we'll get onto that as well. There's so much to speak about, and hopefully this covers a lot of different ideas here, and hope you enjoyed that. And I know it's very controversial, a lot of the stuff we said in this lecture, but I'm trying to keep on the conceptual level, so so let's try keeping the ideas as the ideas as they're meant to be, and analyze the ideas properly. And hopefully this will bring a lot of clarity to people about world religions and things like that, and the mistake people make when trying to understand God. And it's all based on the presupposition that the world of physicality is more real. Okay, thanks for watching, and we'll see you hopefully in the next video. Thank you. All the best.